Welcome to the first of our Fighting High Podcast Remembrance episodes. When the Letters Came.
Dear Mrs. Little, for some time I have been meaning to write to you. I so much want you to know how grateful we were to Flying Officer Little's great courage and supreme sacrifice. He will always remain in my memory, because had he not controlled his plane so skillfully and for so long, many of us would have lost our lives.
That letter was written in the spring of 1944 by a woman who had never met the young Canadian pilot whose life she was mourning. She wrote simply to tell his mother that her son's final actions had saved a village and the lives of strangers. When we think about the air war, we often picture aircraft, operations and statistics. But behind every missing aircraft was a family waiting for news. And very often, letters passed between strangers, people bound together by loss, hope and shared experience. Over the years, I've come across many deeply personal letters. They were never written for history books, just one human being reaching out to another. In this remembrance episode, I'd like to share some of those voices with you, words written in grief, in courage, and in enduring remembrance. You'll hear excerpts from letters following 4 incidents. The first concerns a Canadian pilot who sacrificed his life to save his crewmates and a village. Then, correspondence between a Lancaster pilot's father and the father of the mid-upper gunner after the loss of their aircraft. Thirdly, a letter from one grieving Australian mother to another. And finally, a navigator and prisoner of war writing to the parents of his pilot after returning from Germany. Our first letters were written in the aftermath of a terrible training accident in March 1944. In April, the commanding officer of the pilot's training unit, a Wing Commander Findlay, wrote to the pilot's mother in Montreal, Canada.
Dear Mrs. Little, before you receive this letter, you will have had a telegram informing you of the very sad loss of your son, Flying Officer Martin Stewart Little. Your son, along with a full crew, took off on a normal night training flight on the 24th of March 1944. After the aircraft had been airborne about 3 hours, it crashed at Little Chalfont. Death was instantaneous to your son, but the rest of the crew managed to escape from the aircraft before it crashed. Your son stayed with the aircraft and made a successful effort in preventing a crash in a populated area. Owing to the time taken to communicate under present conditions, it was not possible to ascertain your wishes regarding the funeral in the time available, and arrangements were therefore made for your son's burial without reference to you. He was buried at Brookwood Cemetery, Surrey, at 2:30 p.m. Wednesday, 29th of March. I'm sure that you understand the necessity for the action which was taken, and I sincerely trust the arrangements we were able to make were what you would have wished. The funeral was conducted by the Station Padre of RAF Station Northolt, and officers and airmen were in attendance, the coffin being carried by senior aircrew members. A wreath was sent by the officers of this unit. May I now express the great sympathy we all feel with you in the sad loss which you have sustained. Your son, along with his crew, was just about to join an operational squadron. I sincerely believe that he had the makings of an excellent pilot, and have no hesitation in saying that the crew as a whole, the members of which came from all parts of Canada, would have been outstanding. Please believe me when I say the sense of loss which you feel is shared by all of us. Martin was very popular with all members of this unit and highly regarded by all. I hope you will find some consolation in the fact that he apparently chose almost certain death rather than abandon his aircraft and leave it to crash in the village of Little Chalfont, and that your son sacrificed his life in the cause of freedom and in the service of his country. If there is anything I can do for you at any time, please do not hesitate to write.
In April, a woman named Catherine Bethel also wrote to Mrs. Little. Earlier, you heard just a few words from Catherine's letter. Here is that letter in full. She mentions visiting Woking. Brookwood Military Cemetery, where Martin was buried, is on the outskirts of Woking.
Dear Mrs. Little, for some time I have been meaning to write to you. I so much want you to know how grateful we were to Flying Officer Little's great courage and supreme sacrifice. He will always remain in my memory, because had he not controlled his plane so skillfully and for so long, many of us would have lost our lives. I thanked God when, with one supreme effort, the plane turned off to the woods and fields beyond, and at that moment it burst fully into flame. I do want you to know that help was as soon at the spot as possible, and if it were humanly possible, Mr. Little would have been saved. But he was gone when the policeman arrived, and in the policeman's opinion, death was instantaneous. Mr. Little was not burned. He was untouched. He fell some distance from his plane. I feel you would like to know this, because I should if it was my husband or my baby daughter. My mother, Mrs. Osborne, has also written to you. I'm living with Mother, so we share the same address. It is impossible just now to get a house or a flat. In Mother's letter, she told you that we sent 2 wreaths to Woking. We are waiting to hear from the RCAF in London where the rest of the money is to be sent. It amounts to just over £10. But whatever charity benefits, we can never express all our gratitude, and our deepest sympathy to you cannot bring him back. I haven't been to Woking since the war, but it is a peaceful country town in beautiful Surrey. It is a clean town amid gentle hills and wooded countryside, and just now, in spring, it will look very beautiful with daffodils and all the flowering shrub trees in bloom. I had a letter from Flying Officer Beresford, a member of Mr. Little's crew. He was in hospital, and I wrote and asked if I could help at all, and I also asked for your address. I would like to quote from his letter. We are very proud ourselves of our pilot's behaviour on that fatal night, as I am sure it is to him the rest of us owe our lives who were allowed to escape. We are gratified to hear additional testimony of his heroism from you. I don't think I can add any more to that tribute. We are adopting the other Canadian sergeant in hospital with a fractured leg whilst he is near us, and if it is possible for us to get to Woking, you'll know that fresh flowers will be placed to your brave son's memory. May God bless you and give you his comfort at this time. So many of us in this village have thought of you. If there is anything more you wish to know and that I can tell you, I shall be happy to write again. Meanwhile, I remain very sincerely, Catherine Bethel.
Letters from commanding officers and strangers often tried to make sense of loss, but sometimes the deepest understanding came from those living through the same uncertainty, parents waiting for news that might never arrive. Lancaster pilot Reg Barker was shot down on a raid to Kiel in August 1944. In the weeks that followed, letters passed between his father John and families of the crew. John had received word that Reg was safe, and in October he wrote to the father of mid-upper gunner Bill Taffy Kinsey. On the 11th of October, Mr. Kinsey replied,
Dear Mr. Barker, I was very glad to have your letter today and to know you have heard that the skipper is safe. I have no information this way since the notification. Somehow I have a feeling that the crew are all safe. Just a hunch, that's all. On the night of August 26-27, I was downstairs, as is my custom, until about 2 a.m. At 1:30, I felt that Bill was in trouble, and although I would naturally have been relieved, I would have been surprised if the telegraph boy didn't appear on Monday morning. Worse luck he did. But after the first awful few moments, I felt, as Bill had done in the neighbourhood of 60 ops over Germany, his luck was very good. Now we are left with the hope that our lads will one day cross the threshold again. Should I hear anything definite, I will lose no time in writing you.
On 5th of December 1944, Mr. Kinsey wrote to John Barker again.
Dear Mr. Barker, I have heard from the Air Ministry. They say 5 of the crew are POWs in Germany and 2 lost their lives. Flying Officer Dobson and 1 unidentified as yet. That was Bill, my son. It will be a miracle if such is not the case. I must not complain. Thousands have had to sacrifice so that future generations may live in freedom. One thing comforts me above all else on this earth. Bill, or Taffy as the RAF knew him, was in the job he wanted from childhood. That is the fortune of war. I had a family, wife, 2 sons and 1 daughter in September 1941, and, except for my son John, who was in the States since 1937, I'm all alone. But I have very happy memories that always remain. I must say my son's luck was phenomenal. He had done around 60 ops. Well, Mr. Barker, I am glad you know your son is safe. Perhaps at some future date I may be able to hear or read some details of their last op. I sometimes think Dobson and Bill were either killed or wounded by flak and were unable to bail out. Let us all earnestly hope and pray that this awful business will soon end, and that the war will definitely ensure peace for a long time to come.
On the 24th of January, John Barker replied to Mr. Kinsey.
Many times since receiving your letter, I've tried to write to you, but the words would just not come to me. Your news was a great shock, for I had hoped and prayed for something better. Then I awaited a letter from my son, hoping it would give me some help, but it brought no information about that unfortunate flight. I felt I'd known Teffy so well, although we'd never met, for I'd followed the forming of the crew and their subsequent progress with great interest. It certainly does you great credit in the way you try to console yourself, and I admire your spirit. Yet, know that inwardly you must feel that deep, irreplaceable loss. This, after your other losses, must have been a bitter blow, and my heart and understanding go out to you. It is with this understanding that I realize how futile it is to try and express one's feelings on paper. Perhaps someday we shall have the pleasure of talking things over with more facts before us than we have at present.
The letters between fathers often carried a quiet restraint. Hope held firm even in the face of loss. But grief found different voices. Sometimes it was shared between mothers who had never met, connected only through the friendship of their sons. The next letter is one such exchange. Australian airman Frank Cummings lost his life in an accident on the 19th of November 1943. He had been a close friend of Tempest pilot Bill Maloney, who was shot down on the Dutch-German border on the 16th of September 1944. On the 4th of November 1944, Frank's mother wrote to Bill's mother.
Dear Mrs. Maloney, now I have started, I don't know what to say. What can one sorrowing mother say to another sorrowing mother? There is just nothing to say that can in any way ease the heartache and desolation that comes when news such as yours comes. I wonder if you know who I am. I feel sure you do, because I seem to have known your Bill so well through my dear son. He and Bill left Australia together and were staunch pals until my dear one was taken last November. They were together through their long leave in London last year, which was so irksome to them both, as they wanted action. Poor darlings, both of them. I received a letter today from Mrs. McGuinness in London, who knew and loved our two lads, and she told me the tragic news and sent me your address. There was evidently a very strong palship between our two lads. They were always together, according to Son's letters and photos, and today, when we read the news, hubby and I could only say, well, perhaps they are together again. I cannot express words of comfort. They mean nothing to the bereaved. All one can say is they were doing what to them was their duty, and were happy in so doing. To me, it is a waste of lovely young lives, and all so useless and senseless. I only wish I could meet you, as our boys were so much to each other. I have a very lovely photo of them together, taken in London last September. They look so happy. Let me know if you have one of them, and if not, I will have one taken off and send it to you. It is a lovely picture. Well, dear friend, there is nothing to say. We just know the heartache you are experiencing, and yet we cannot help. Was Bill an only child too?
Many wartime letters tried to offer comfort through shared sorrow. Others carried something else, the testimony of those who survived, written to families who never saw their sons return. Our final letter was written after the war. It contains a detailed account of the crew's final moments. John Valentine served as a navigator with No. 49 Squadron. On the night of 30th, 31st of May 1942, John's crew failed to return from the 1,000-bomber raid to Cologne. John was captured. After the war, John wrote to his pilot, Philip Floyd's parents.
Dear Mr. Floyd, you will probably remember me by name, for I had the honour to be your son's navigator on his last and fatal trip to Germany. I am taking the risk of writing in the hope that you would be interested in his last journey. Please forgive me if I probe a wound that is not yet healed. As you know, we were among the force of 1,000 machines which set off to bomb Cologne on the night of 30th of May 1942. It was a beautiful clear evening with a full moon and perfect visibility. All went smoothly until we were approaching the target area. We could see the flak ahead and the flashes of exploding bombs. We were about 13,000 feet up and suddenly caught in the intersection point of a score or more of searchlight beams. Their predictors must have been following us, without our knowledge, for there was no warning or trial beams. We were suddenly illuminated, and obviously the focus of attention of a single unit or battery of lights. We had experienced this before, and your son, without worrying in the slightest, gave us an exhibition of his prowess as a pilot, such as he had done on previous occasions. He dived, climbed, twisted, turned, stalled, and even almost looped, but, try as he could, was unable to get us out of the cone. By this time, of course, it was not only lights that were worrying us. Being so firmly caught by the lights, we had become the target of a considerable volume of artillery, and shells had been exploding all around. We'd been hit several times, but fortunately no one was injured, and the flying qualities of the machine were not impaired. Finally, your son decided that more drastic measures were required, and ordered me, in my capacity of bomb aimer, to jettison our bomb load. This being done, he put the machine into a steep dive, and we careered madly downwards. We had to descend to 9,000 feet before we were clear of the lights, which were extremely persistent. However, he pulled out of the dive when we were no longer illuminated, and we endeavoured to set a course for home. It was only a matter of seconds before we were caught in more lights, and then saw to our horror that we were within range of relatively light ack fire, which was being hose-piped at us from all directions. I remember most distinctly your son saying most calmly that he thought we had had it. But of course, he didn't give in without a fight. He started climbing and trying to dodge streams of tracer ammunition flying in our direction. But a few moments later, the mid-upper gamma reported that an engine was on fire. A bullet had pierced the container of the engine coolant material, which had drained off, with the result that this engine quickly overheated and burst into flames. Conditions were now desperate, but your son was completely unruffled. He coolly ordered the crew to bail out and applied himself to steadying the machine until we were all clear. We were, of course, losing height at an alarming rate, and to behave as he did required the steadiest of nerves. There was a short queue to escape from the front hatch, and while waiting my turn, I tapped your son on the knee and held out my hand. We couldn't speak for the noise of the remaining engine, and the rushing wind drowned everything else. Your son quietly grasped my hand, smiled, and then concentrated on his job of pilot and captain of the machine. He knew that it was his duty to remain at his post until all his crew were as safe as it was within his power to make them, i.e., they had left the machine by parachute. I am afraid that in his thought for us, he gave himself no chance. A few seconds after shaking his hand, I was dangling at the end of a chute, and my first recollection was that of our machine hitting the ground and completely bursting into flames. Your son must have died instantly, and it is no exaggeration to say that at the cost of his own life, he saved those of 5 others. You can imagine the grateful and admiring memory that I have of a gallant English gentleman. The gratitude of our wives, mothers, and other relations and friends needs no telling from me.
The letter you heard at the beginning of this programme was written by a stranger to a grieving mother. One voice reaching across distance and loss to say simply, "Your son mattered, and he is remembered." The letters shared today were never meant for public ears. They were written quietly, often through tears, in the hope that words might carry comfort where nothing else could. Yet together they form a lasting testament, not only to sacrifice, but to kindness, connection, and the enduring bonds forged in the shadow of war. In reading them now, we honour not just those who were lost, but those who reached out to remember them. Thank you for listening.